Today for Missions Mentorship, I want to talk about not a novice or not a recent convert. When Paul was writing to the church at Ephesus that Timothy was leading, he wrote in 1 Timothy 3:6, he must not be a recent convert. And so many times when we're doing church planting movement discussions, we encounter this issue of, well, how can you have rapidly multiplying churches if you can't get pastors for them because you shouldn't have a recent convert become a pastor? That's against the Word of God. And so Dr. Rob Shipley addressed this in his dissertation a number of years ago as he studied the Uganda Assemblies of God, a church that had 200 or 300 churches, but decided that they desired to have a church planting movement. And so they sent their pastors out, and within a 2-year period, they planted 2,800 new churches. And so you can see that the dilemma now, because as you have 2,800 new churches, how are you going to have pastors for these churches if you cannot take a recent convert, but all of the converts within the churches are recent converts? And so Dr. Rob Shipley did an extensive theological study on this passage and related passages, and he noted, as others have, that the list in Timothy that Paul gave for overseers or elders and deacons was different than the list that he gave in Titus chapter 1. And so many people, what they do when they see these two lists is they try to put the two together and say, okay, all of these things are the requirements for becoming a pastor, an overseer or an elder or deacon. But Rob Shipley said maybe there's a reason that Paul addressed some things in Timothy and other things in Titus. And so he looked at the context, looked at the passage, and it was determined by him that in the passage in Timothy, Paul was writing to a church that had been established maybe for about 10 years or so. And so in that case, it would not make sense to ordain a pastor who had been in the church just a short time and then become a pastor over people who had been believers for maybe 10 years or so. However, when he wrote to Titus and he said ordain elders, and he did not put the qualification of a recent convert, this is very likely because the church in Crete, where Titus was left to ordain elders, that church had just been established months before, maybe a year or so, and so all of the believers there were recent converts. So if Paul instilled that criteria to the church in Crete, no one could become pastor, and Titus could not accomplish his duty of ordaining leaders for that church. We also see, and he pointed out in Acts chapter 14, verse 23, and this is on Paul and Barnabas' first missionary journey, that they appointed elders for them in every church, and with prayer and fasting committed them to the Lord. And so this was a pattern of Paul as well. Rob Shipley concluded, after examining these passages in both their literary and historical context, that it was clear that Paul did not intend to curtail the involvement and participation of new believers in leadership of young congregations. I hope you have enjoyed this missions mentorship moment, and hope to see you again soon.